The night remembered everything. Smoke clung to the saloon rafters the way old sins cling to men who never left town. Oil lamps burned low, their light honey-colored and tired, casting long shadows that leaned and swayed as if they, too, had been drinking. Cards slid across the table with soft, dry whispers, like secrets no one bothered to keep. Outside, the wind dragged itself down the street, carrying dust and the smell of horses and forgotten prayers. She stood near the wall, hands folded, eyes lowered. The men spoke around her as if she were a chair, a coat, an object that waited without opinion. To them, she was small and foreign and silent, which made her easy to dismiss. Worthless, some would say, not bothering to lower their voices. She understood enough to know what they meant. She had learned long ago that pain does not always need translation. Her dress was clean, but worn thin at the seams, mended carefully with patience rather than hope. She carried herself straight, not because she felt strong, but because bending invited worse things. Inside her lived a quiet endurance, shaped by years of being looked past, traded, measured by what she could give, and never by who she was. The man who claimed to own her that night sat slouched at the table, fingers stained with tobacco and bad decisions. He laughed too loud, drank too much, and lost with the careless ease of someone who had never truly earned anything. He did not look at her when he pushed his final chips forward. He did not hesitate when the pile came up short. Her presence was mentioned only briefly, like an afterthought, like a debt that meant nothing once it was gone. The cards fell. The table went still. Across from him sat a rancher most men barely noticed. He wore no shine, no sharp edges meant to impress. His hands were rough, marked by seasons rather than fights. He played slow, as if time belonged to him alone. When the last card turned in his favor, he did not smile. He did not raise his voice. He simply gathered what was now his, and that included her, though he did not reach for her, did not gesture, did not claim. For the first time that night, he looked at her. It was not a long look. It did not linger where it should not. It carried no hunger, no triumph. It held something quieter, heavier. Recognition, perhaps. Or regret. She could not tell, only that his eyes did not pass through her the way others did. They paused, as if acknowledging a truth that needed no words. The gambler cursed softly and pushed back his chair. The matter was settled. A few men laughed. One muttered something cruel about luck and useless things. The rancher said nothing. He stood, placed a few coins on the bar, and waited by the door. She followed because she always did. The night outside was colder than she expected. The saloon door closed behind them with a dull thud that sounded final, like a chapter ending whether she was ready or not. A horse waited nearby, patient, head low. The rancher moved with calm efficiency, adjusting the saddle, checking the straps. He did not hurry her. He did not touch her arm or push her forward. He simply nodded once, an invitation rather than an order. As they rode away, the town shrank behind them, its lights blinking out one by one. The road stretched open and dark, the land wide and indifferent. She had traveled roads like this before, each one promising a different kind of captivity. Her body knew how to brace itself. Her heart closed its doors quietly, preparing for survival. The rancher rode ahead, giving her space even now. His back was straight, his movement steady, as if the night itself could not shake him. She wondered what kind of man wins another human being and treats the moment like a burden rather than a prize. The thought unsettled her more than cruelty would have. They reached the ranch near dawn. The house was small, weathered, standing alone against a sky just beginning to pale. No guards. No locks beyond the ordinary. He dismounted and tended to the horses before anything else, his care unshowy and thorough. Only then did he turn to her. He gestured toward the house, then toward a smaller room off to the side. His words were few, simple, spoken slowly. Food, rest, safety. He left her there without waiting for gratitude or fear, without standing in the doorway to remind her of her place. Alone in the quiet, she sat on the edge of the bed and listened. No shouting, no footsteps pacing, only the sound of wind moving through dry grass, the low creak of the house settling into morning. For the first time in a long while, nothing was being demanded of her. She did not sleep right away. Trust was not something her body remembered how to do. But as the sun climbed higher, warming the thin walls, a fragile thought took root. Perhaps this place was different. Perhaps the man who had won her had not seen her as something to be spent or discarded. Outside, the rancher worked, unaware that a life had quietly shifted inside his home. He did not know yet how deeply their paths would entwine, only that the night had handed him a responsibility he did not ask for and could not ignore. And somewhere between the fading darkness and the rising light, a story began, not with rescue or romance, but with the simple, radical act of restraint. The road ahead remained uncertain. But for the first time, uncertainty did not feel like a sentence. It felt like a door left slightly open, waiting to see who would choose to walk through. Morning arrived without ceremony. Light slid through the narrow windows and rested on the floor like a promise made quietly, unsure if it would be believed. She woke stiff and alert. As if sleep had been a borrowed thing she might be asked to return. The room was simple, clean, untouched by another presence. No lock on the door. That absence felt louder than any threat. She stepped outside and found the ranch already breathing. The man was working the corral, moving with an unhurried rhythm, repairing a loose rail before tending to the horses. He did not look up when he heard her, only nodded once, acknowledging her existence without staking claim to it. On a small table near the house, food waited, covered against the flies. He said it was for her, then went back to his work. She ate slowly, each bite careful. Kindness, when it comes unannounced, can feel like a test. Her eyes traced the lines of the land stretching outward, open and unforgiving, yet honest in a way towns never were. This place asked for labor and patience, not obedience. Days began to settle into one another. He rose before the sun and returned only when it sank, his presence steady, predictable. He spoke little, but when he did, his words were chosen with care, as though he understood how easily language could wound. He never stood too close, never watched her sleep, never reminded her of how she had come to him. The silence between them grew less heavy, more like shared air. She began to help without being asked, sweeping the floor, washing clothes in the basin out back, tending a small patch of vegetables near the house. Each task was an offering, a way to test whether usefulness would be demanded or simply accepted. He thanked her every time, the words spoken softly, without surprise, as if her contribution were expected not because she owed him, but because she was capable. In town, she walked a step behind him, more from habit than instruction. Eyes followed them. Whispers found her ears even when the words did not. Some faces held curiosity, others contempt. A shopkeeper hesitated before placing change in her hand, then forced a smile. An older woman studied her carefully, not unkindly, and nodded as though recognizing something familiar in her posture. The rancher remained close, but did not shield her, trusting her strength without abandoning her to it. At night, they sat near the fire, not facing each other, but angled slightly, as if meeting in the middle of shared warmth. He told her pieces of his life in small, unadorned fragments. Land inherited, a family gone quiet over time, work that filled the days but left the nights long. She listened, offering her own story only in glances, in the way her shoulders eased, in the rare smile that came when she felt unseen enough to be herself. She learned his routines, the way he paused before entering a room, the way he always asked before moving something that belonged to her, even when it was nothing more than a cup. He learned her silences, which ones meant fear, which meant thought, which meant contentment. When she startled awake one night from a dream she could not name, he did not rush to her side. He waited until she spoke first. That waiting mattered. Yet the world, beyond the ranch, did not forget her. The man who lost her passed through town again, his voice carrying too far, his laughter sharp with resentment. Words reached the ranch, carried by neighbors who spoke them gently but with concern. He had begun to tell a different version of the story, one where she had been stolen rather than won, one where ownership still clung to him like a bad smell. The rancher listened without anger. He did not dismiss the threat, nor did he magnify it. He only asked her what she wanted, the question careful and unburdened by expectation. She struggled for the right words, for a language strong enough to hold truth. What she wanted was simple and terrifying: to stay, to belong without being claimed. When she finally said it, he nodded, as though the answer had been hers all along. He told her she could leave anytime, that no debt bound her here. The offer felt real because it was made without conditions. For the first time, choice did not feel like an illusion. That night, she sat alone on the porch, watching the stars scatter across the sky. The land breathed around her, vast and quiet. Somewhere inside the house, the rancher moved softly, careful not to disturb. She realized then that safety was not the absence of danger, but the presence of respect. It settled into her chest slowly, like warmth returning to numb fingers. The past had not released its hold, and the future remained unwritten. But between them lay this fragile, growing thing built from restraint and care. It was not love yet, not even hope in its full shape. It was trust, tentative and brave, and it asked to be protected. As the night deepened, she understood that whatever came next would test it, and that made her hold it closer, not with fear, but with quiet resolve. Time softened the edges of her fear, though it never erased them completely. It simply taught them where to rest. The ranch became a place where days unfolded with purpose rather than dread, where each morning carried work instead of warning. She moved through the rooms with quiet confidence now, her presence no longer tentative. The land seemed to recognize her, responding to her care with small, honest rewards. Crops grew steadier. The animals calmed beneath her touch. Even the house felt warmer, as if it had been waiting for someone who knew how to listen. The rancher noticed these changes without naming them. He saw how she lifted her chin when strangers passed, how her voice grew firmer when she spoke, how laughter found her more easily. He never claimed responsibility for her strength, understanding that it had always lived inside her. He simply made space for it to rise. In return, she began to see him not as a refuge, but as a man shaped by his own quiet wounds. Loneliness clung to him in the evenings, settling into his shoulders when the work was done. She learned to sit beside him, then not to fix what could not be fixed, but to share the weight of it. Their connection deepened in the small moments. A cup of water placed within reach. A coat offered without insistence. Shared glances that held more than words ever could. Love did not arrive like a storm. It grew like grass through dry soil, patient and resilient, rooted in kindness rather than need. She found herself caring not because she owed him, but because he mattered. He found himself changed by the way she trusted him, by the quiet courage it took for her to believe in gentleness again. The town, however, remained restless. Rumors moved faster than truth, and resentment sharpened with repetition. The man who had lost her grew louder, his stories darker, his sense of entitlement more dangerous. He spoke of injustice, of theft, of property taken by deceit. Some listened out of prejudice, others out of fear, a few out of convenience. The law, distant and uneven, began to lean in his direction. When word reached the ranch, it came not as a threat, but as a warning. The rancher listened, his face calm but resolute. He did not rush to anger. He gathered documents, spoke with witnesses, prepared himself for a confrontation he had hoped to avoid. He told her what was coming, laying the truth before her without adornment. He reminded her again that she was free to choose. That reminder, offered so many times, had become a promise rather than an escape. She surprised him by standing closer than usual. Her hand brushed his arm, not in fear, but in solidarity. She told him she would not hide, that she would speak if she was asked. Her voice carried a steadiness that had been hard-won. In that moment, he saw not a woman in need of protection, but a partner ready to face the world beside him. The day came sooner than expected. The gambler arrived with men whose expressions held little curiosity and less mercy. They stood at the edge of the property, boots planted like claims, eyes scanning for weakness. The rancher met them halfway, his posture unyielding. She stood just behind him, visible but not diminished. The air thickened with tension, the land holding its breath. Accusations flew, sharp and careless. Words like ownership and loss and rights were thrown as if they carried weight enough to justify cruelty. The rancher answered calmly, presenting proof, speaking of transactions witnessed and choices made. When the gambler demanded she be returned, demanded she speak, all eyes turned to her. She stepped forward. Her heart beat loud, but her voice did not shake. She spoke of her past without spectacle, of being treated as something rather than someone. She spoke of the night she was lost without being asked, of the days that followed where respect replaced fear. She did not beg. She did not accuse. She simply told the truth, trusting it to stand on its own. The silence that followed felt different from the ones she had known before. It was not heavy with dismissal, but with reckoning. The men shifted. The gambler scoffed, but his certainty faltered. The rancher remained still, letting her words do the work he could not do for her. They left without resolution. Promises of returning carried on bitter tongues. The threat lingered unresolved, casting a long shadow over the land. But something fundamental had changed. She had spoken, and the world had heard her, even if it was not ready to accept what she said. That night, they sat together beneath a sky bruised with stars. Neither spoke for a long while. When he finally broke the silence, his voice was low, careful. He told her he would stand by whatever choice she made, now and always. She looked at him, seeing not the man who had won her, but the man who had waited for her to claim herself. She told him she was not afraid anymore, not of leaving, not of staying, but of losing what they had built. He reached for her hand then, slowly, giving her time to pull away. She did not. The touch was simple, reverent, full of the promise of a future neither dared to name yet. Beyond the ranch, forces gathered, unresolved and impatient. The calm they shared felt precious, fragile, worth defending. As the night deepened, she understood that the final test had not yet come. But whatever waited for them would meet two people no longer standing alone, bound not by fate or fortune, but by a shared decision to face the world together. The reckoning arrived on a morning too clear for mercy. Sunlight spread across the land as if nothing had ever been taken from it, as if men did not carry their hungers into wide places and call them rights. Hooves sounded at the edge of the property, measured and deliberate. The rancher stood from the porch where he had been mending a tool and waited. He did not tell her to stay behind. He did not step in front of her. He trusted what they had become. The gambler came again, this time with authority stitched to his anger. Papers were waved. Voices rose. The language of law was bent to serve old prejudices, old comforts. He spoke of ownership with a practiced ease, of transactions that ignored the beating heart at their center. He said her name poorly, as if even the sound of it offended him. He demanded she be returned, demanded the past be honored simply because it had happened. The rancher answered with steadiness. He spoke of witnesses, of fair play, of the moment a life had been treated as a wager without consent. His words were careful, restrained, built to endure scrutiny. Still, doubt hovered. The men who listened measured not only facts, but faces, accents, origins. Justice, like land, had always favored those who arrived first. When they turned to her, asking if she would speak, the old fear stirred. It rose like a tide she had learned to read. She felt it, acknowledged it, and let it pass. She stepped forward into the open, the sun warming her shoulders, the wind lifting her hair. She did not look at the gambler. She looked at the men who believed they were entitled to decide her fate. She spoke slowly, choosing each word as if it were a stone placed to cross deep water. She told them she had been lost without being asked, that she had been carried from place to place, as if movement itself could erase her will. She told them that the night she arrived at the ranch, no hand had closed around her future. That days followed where she was given space to breathe, to work, to choose. She said she stayed because she wanted to, because dignity had been offered without condition. She said no law should force a person back into silence. The gambler laughed, brittle and loud, but the sound did not land. The men shifted again, uneasy now, confronted not with defiance, but with clarity. The rancher said nothing. He let her voice stand where his could not. The decision came without ceremony. The papers were folded away. Claims were dismissed. The past was acknowledged, but not allowed to dictate the present. The gambler left with his bitterness intact, smaller than he had arrived. The land exhaled. Later, when the dust had settled and the visitors were gone, they stood together beneath the open sky. The rancher turned to her, his expression unguarded. He told her he had never believed she belonged to him. He said if she chose to leave, he would help her go. If she chose to stay, he would stand beside her as an equal. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a vow. She answered by taking his hand, her grip sure. She said she had spent too long being told where she fit. She said this place felt like a beginning she could shape with her own hands. She said she wanted to stay, not because she needed saving, but because she had found something worth tending. Their life did not change overnight. It deepened. Days continued with work and weather and the steady patience of the land. She learned to read contracts as carefully as skies. He learned to ask for help without feeling diminished. In town, some eyes softened, others did not. It mattered less with each passing season. Years moved quietly. The house grew warmer with use. Laughter returned more often. She walked the fields as if they recognized her steps. He watched her sometimes, not with possession, but with gratitude. When they married, it was simple, witnessed by neighbors who had learned to see her. No one spoke of poker or worthlessness. Those words had lost their power. On evenings when the light slanted low and the world felt generous, they sat together on the porch. He would reach for her hand, still careful, still asking without words. She would lean into the space they shared, knowing it had been earned. Their love was not loud. It did not announce itself. It lived in choices repeated daily, in respect renewed, in the refusal to turn a person into a prize. If this story leaves anything behind, let it be this. Some souls are called worthless only because the world lacks the language to name quiet strength. The safest love is not the one that conquers, but the one that listens. And sometimes the truest victory is not what is won at a table, but what is given freely and kept with care.